Hello, and welcome to In the Roud. Greetings and salutations, dear listeners. My name is Matt Quinn, and this is In the Roud, a folk song podcast. I'll be your host to guide you through the world of traditional folk song as we go through the Roud Index, one song at a time. Each episode will feature two guests, one providing an historical look at the song, while the other will be a singer from the folk music scene to talk about their own version of the song. If you're new to the podcast, or new to folk songs in general, and are a bit unsure as to what the Roud Index is, fret not. If you go back to the very start of this podcast, you'll find an introduction episode where I sat down with Steve Roud and spoke to him about the index, what it is and why he created it. I highly recommend listening to that before diving into the main episodes themselves. We're now in the middle of Season 1 and this is Episode 3. We're looking at the song labelled Roud 3, which is The Seeds of Love. Later on, we'll hear from singer Lizzy Hardingham and the version that she sings, but for the time being, let's have an historical look at the song from the creator of the Roud Index himself, Steve Roud. Welcome back to the podcast, Steve Roud. Hello.
Hello again.
Hello, very nice to have you back. How have you been?
Fine, thank you. Yes.
Good. Right, so this is episode 3. We're in episode 3 already. How time flies when you're having fun. We're talking about Roud number 3, which is The Seeds of Love. And so, first of all, what's the song about? What's the plot? Does it have a plot? You know.
Well, it's not one of those big ballads that has that tells a story. This is a pretty good example of a lyrical song. It's all about love, really, which is, the title says it all. I sowed the seeds of love. And it's allegorical in that love is expressed here in terms of flowers, and it's all, set in the garden, and different flowers are mentioned. Basically, in the version that we're talking about at the beginning, because it'll get more complicated in a minute, because it always does, I sowed the seeds of love. It's primarily a female voice. The narrator, as it were, is female in most cases, but it could be male. And in effect, the woman, has had a boyfriend, and she's put all her love into this relationship, and it's all gone wrong somehow. He's run off, and so it's a romantic but tinged with sadness song.
Sure.
And as you'll get if you ever listen to any of the versions, the Seeds of Love versions are really quite similar. The flowers change a bit, and we'll come on to that in a minute. But mostly it's a song of romantic regret.
Is this a very popular song going back over the history of it? Is it widespread? And
yes, in the tradition, it was extremely popular. It was Cecil Sharp says, quote, "It is no exaggeration to say that this song is known to the peasant folk all over England." Now, don't worry about the fact that he used the word peasant, because that was a standard word at that time, meaning a country person, peasant. But William Chappell, the antiquarian, in 1859 says that this is one of the 3 most popular songs among the servant maids of the present generation. In other words, the young women of the 1850s, he said that this was one of the top 3 songs. The other 2, by the way, are Cupid's Garden and Early One Morning. But Seeds of Love, he reckoned in the 1850s, every young female, at least, knew the song and sang the song. So yeah, it was very widespread.
So I think I remember hearing you talk about this somewhere else, that had you done things differently, this might have been Roud 1.
It might have been, yes, because it was the first song that Cecil Sharp collected. in his new role as a folk song collector, 1903. He collected it in Somerset from John England, nicely named for an English song. So within the folk revival, well, the traditional end of the revival, everybody knows Seeds of Love because it's the first song that Cecil got. So I would have named it number one, yes, but just to keep in line with Cecil.
And so does this song spread internationally then as well?
It does, but not so much as other songs. We talked about the Raggle-Taggle Gypsies as number one. That was found in America and Canada just as much as in Britain, maybe more so. Seeds of Love is reported from England, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, but most commonly from England. And I would guess, I haven't looked at the map, but I would guess mostly from the southern half of England.
So it is an English song in origin then, do you reckon?
Sorry?
It is an English song in
Well,
origin,
we'll
you
come on
reckon?
to that in a moment.
Okay, all right.
Origins,
I'm,
yeah.
I'm skipping ahead.
Yeah, there are versions, there are good versions in America and Canada, but not nearly so many. So basically, we would say it's more popular in England than elsewhere, but it's not confined to England.
Right. So we know that it was the first song Cecil Sharp collected. What was the year on that?
1903.
1903. And how much further back can we trace this?
Right. As always, when you ask me that question, we start off with a caveat, and we start off by saying it's not as easy as it sounds, because the main problem here is that there are two songs. The Seeds of Love, which starts, I sowed the seeds of love. But there's another song called Let No Man Steal Your Time, which most people will know. And some people regard them as two separate songs and others as the same song, but in different versions. So the earliest versions that we can find in print, as always, because evidence comes from the print, are of the Let No Man Steal Your Time. But soon after the earliest versions, the Time song includes the verses about the flowers and the lost love. Doesn't include the sowed the seeds line, which is sort of key to it all. That comes in a bit later. My gut reaction, as we'll find out in a minute, is that the Let No Man Steal Your Time is the older song, and Seeds of Love is a sort of slightly cut down version of Let No Man Steal Your Time. First of all, say that the Let No Man Steal Your Time, we know that it's mentioned in another song in 1696. Okay, there's a song called An Excellent New Song called The Young Man's Answer to the Maid's Garden of Time. Now that's 1696, but it's an answer song. So it's an answer to what we think was Let No Man Steal Your Time. So our first reference is to something that isn't quite the original. The original must have been before that. So let's say 1670s or 80s is likely.
Right.
So what we've got is the Let No Man Steal Your Time in the 1690s, and then by the 1760s, it's got all of the Seeds of Love verses in the song, but not the line, I sowed the seeds of love. It's got all the flowers, it's got all the lost boyfriends and things. The Seeds of Love as a title comes in about 1820. And from then on, all the broadside printers in the country start printing it as the Seeds of Love. And that's the version that we sing today.
I mean, yeah, that's a very much more sort of poetic title, isn't it?
Yes.
Than anything that's come before,
Yeah.
so
of course,
far.
let no man steal your time revolves around the pun of time with an H and a Y, the herb, and it's about
Yes.
gardens. So let no man steal your time. Sometimes it means the plant, sometimes it means time, Time. In other words, girls, don't waste your time on men who are going to be unfaithful, because you're not going to be beautiful and young forever. So, choose your flowers, your boyfriends carefully. Let no man steal your time. But I sowed the seeds of love sort of comes after that, after it's all gone wrong for the girl, if you see what I mean.
Yes.
Um, so in the 19th century, all the broadside printers printed versions more or less the same as we sing nowadays. It gets used in stage plays. Um, a play called The Loan of a Lover, 1834, featured the song. It's sung in pleasure gardens and other theatres. In other words, it becomes a pop song of the day. And William Chappell, who we mentioned earlier, who said it was the most popular song amongst serving maids, he published a version with piano, so it became a parlour ballad. So throughout the 19th century, it's existing not just with the serving girls, but with their masters and mistresses, if you like, their employers in the drawing room playing their pianos, and you could hear it on stage. It's a pop song. It'll be everywhere. And then finally, in the 20th century, because of Cecil Sharp collecting it, it gets taught in schools. So a whole new generation of people learn it at school. So it's a good example of, it's not the origin that matters. It's how the folk get hold of the song.
Yeah, and that's much more sort of um, larger development of a song over time than something like the Raggle Gypsies that, as you said, has kind of stayed the same almost over the years.
Yes, and
This one has changed.
yeah, it's changed, and uh, it's it's appeared in all different guises, mainly because it's allegorical. It's metaphorical. You can read into it as much or as little as you want to, and it's romantic with a capital R. So that's one of the reasons why it has lasted.
Yeah. So flowers. Then you mentioned we'd come back to flowers.
Yes, the flowers in the song do change a bit. It's usually got roses in there, sometimes violets, sometimes lilies. Um, Nowadays, we like to think that there was a language of flowers going back thousands of years, going back to the Druids, which is all complete nonsense. Um, in English folklore, which we're talking about for the moment, there were flowers that meant things. Some flowers were lucky, some were unlucky. Rue, when I say flowers, I mean plants, of course, herbs and so on. I mean, rue always meant regret because the rue means to regret. Um, Shakespeare's Ophelia, isn't it? Mentions different flowers. But the real folklore didn't include a sort of language of flowers that had a meaning for every flower or every herb. That comes in Victorian times. Victorian times are the ones who like to have systems. So rather than Fridays being unlucky, they have to introduce Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. They have to give them meanings. So rather than a few flowers having meanings, they have to have a meaning for everything.
Right.
So from Victorian times, you get things like particular flowers, lilies symbolize so and so, roses symbolize so and so. You can't take that back into history. You can't say it meant that in 17th century because it's the Victorians that have tidied it all up, kind of thing. But mostly in the song, it's the gardener comes in, um, because it's all set in a garden, theoretically,
Yeah.
offers the singer, the narrator, 3 different flowers, and she refuses to choose any of them. And of course, that's dangerous, because then she'll be left on the shelf if she's too picky.
So those 3 are just looking up some lyrics.
Nobody.
The violet, the lily, and the pink
Yes,
is what usually is, isn't it?
that's the sort of standardized version. Yes, but the red rose comes in just as often, I think. Anyway, what I'm saying is, don't read too much into the flower meanings, because it's only the Victorians.
Okay, that only
We
goes
don't
back to
count them, of
there.
course. If you read some of the older accounts of the song, and this filters through into modern accounts of the song, you find that there is a legend about somebody who wrote the song at a particular point. There's a basic rule in folklore research and in folk song research, is that you never believe the explanation, because that in itself is usually folklore. In other words, Ring a Ring of Roses, everybody says it's about the plague. Well, it isn't. So the idea that the Ring a Ring of Roses is about the plague is a folk legend in itself.
Okay.
The explanation is folklore. So having said that, in other words, don't believe anything I'm about to say, is that it is claimed that the song was written by Mrs. Fleetwood Habergham, Habergham, of Whalley, I think is how you pronounce it, in Lancashire. She died in 1703, and it is claimed from 1800 onwards, so this is a good 100 years later that somebody's come up with this explanation,
Right.
that she wrote the song because her husband was such a wastrel. He spent all their money on wine, women, and song, and gambling and stuff. So she wrote this as a lament about her life. Now, there's no evidence that it's true. In this case, the chronology might work, because she was alive when we think the song was first published. But this is exactly what happens with the earlier folk songs, is that somebody somewhere latches on to a little thing in the song, comes up with a statement that that statement gets repeated, and it is a legend. In other words, a story that's not true. It's fake news, people.
It happens in the folk scene.
But
And so if that's true, that would have, what she wrote would have been, "Let no man steal your time. Come all you fair and tender girls," etc.
yes, and that's one of the problems in this legend, is that what is claimed is that she wrote Seeds of Love, but as far as we know, the Seeds of Love version is written about 1820.
Okay,
The
yeah,
song
right.
as it existed when she was alive was "Let No Man Steal Your Time."
Oh, but it's claimed that she wrote the Seeds of Love,
Yeah,
but then no one else latched onto it until
yeah,
much later.
yeah, that's right. So internally, these legends, there's always internal evidence that they are a legend that you can look for. Again, in folklore, there's this thing: you always switch it, always turn it round to get to the truth. Somebody says to you, "That house is empty because it's haunted." I think, no, that house is reported to be haunted because it's empty.
Okay, yeah.
Always turn it round, and that's when you start to get an inkling of what thing is about. Anyway,
Turn it round, and see if that thing still works. See if that idea still
yes, that's
works.
right.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
the same with legends. Look for the hook, the thing. Ring a Ring of Roses. The hook is the posies, because people carry posies in the play. and the death, but neither of those are actually in the song, in the rhyme at the beginning. Anyway, you might want to cut that bit out. But
Oh, I don't know. You did mention that earlier.
yeah, so you will come across various people at different times who will claim that so and so wrote this song. Mostly, it is just a legend.
Right.
Okay, so there are lots of versions now. The traditional singer versions that I would suggest people listen to. Obviously, if they go to my index, put in Roud 3, and then click on audio. If you click on audio, then that will exclude all the things that are in books and manuscripts. Click on audio, they'll get something like 80 hits. Some of them are duplicates. There's Joseph Taylor from Lincolnshire. Now that's important because at 1908, the recording, so it's just about as far back as we can go for a sound recording. So Joseph Taylor.
Yeah, and that's recorded by Percy Grainger, isn't it, as well?
Percy Grainger back in 1908, yes. Not one of his cylinder recordings, but he took Joseph Taylor to a recording studio and got them to make some old 78s. So they're better conditioned than the cylinders. So Joseph Taylor, because it's early, and Joseph Taylor was a damn good singer. He really was. You should listen.
Absolutely, yeah.
There's two others that I would link together. Jean Hopkins, very few recordings of her singing anything, but this one was recorded on an EP. And Pop Maynard. Now, both of those from Sussex, from near East Grinstead. They knew each other, the families knew each other. But Jean at the time was a pupil teacher, so she was probably about 24. Whereas Pop Maynard was 80. So
wow, yeah.
You can hear the same song sung by two people from the same community, but a young female and an old man singing the same song. So I find that interesting. If you go to the Sussex Traditions website, and it's called sussextraditions.org, I think it is, you'll hear those two and lots of other ones like Gordon Hall, which you might mention in a moment.
Yeah.
And then the fourth one that I would recommend is George Withers. Now, he comes from Somerset, so that's where Sharp collected the song back in 1903. So in Somerset, it's regarded as a bit of a special Somerset song. And I think, as Matt has just reminded me, that he learnt it when he was at school. So he would have learnt it from Cecil Sharp's book, as it were. So
there you go.
Although he's from the same community, he learnt it in a slightly different way. Because as we say, it's not where you learnt the song, it's what you do with it when you got it. So
quite so.
In this case, as soon as he starts singing it around the house or in the pub or at work, whatever, other people hear it. So even if it starts in print, it can go back in the oral tradition once people sing it.
And then, yes, I would recommend, on top of those, Gordon Hall. Probably the first mention of Gordon Hall on this podcast, the first of many, probably, because I am a huge Gordon Hall fan. He is one of my heroes of folk singing.
Me too, but he is a Marmite singer.
Oh, very much so. I know people who can't stand it, and I know people who I have converted. And so yeah, on the Sussex Traditions website, if you search for Seeds of Love or search for Gordon Hall, it's there. There are some actual, official recordings of Gordon singing other stuff out there, official released CDs and things, but not Seeds of Love. So that's there. I'd recommend, you'll have to remind me about where this thing was from. Ernie Payne.
Ernie's from Gloucestershire.
Gloucestershire, okay.
So
because that's a lovely version.
Yeah. Now the equivalent for Sussex Traditions, the equivalent for Gloucestershire is Glostrad. The website Glostrad that has hundreds of songs from Gloucestershire.
Oh, okay, good. I will add those to the episode notes, the links for those. Yeah, I like the Only Pain one. And a recent discovery of mine was a woman called Lorena Clark from Canada. There's a Topic LP from 1965 called A Canadian Garland, and on that is Lorena Clark singing "Time 'Tis a Pretty Flower," and I would put that in there as
Yes,
well.
there is also, if you're onto American versions, there's one by Gene Ritchie, um, who was, most of you will know, came from the Appalachians, but then became a professional traditional singer, as it were. Um, that's on the Cultural Equity site. The Alan Lomax recordings are on there. Now, of course, Gene, because she came from the Appalachians, probably learnt it from somebody who learnt it from one of the schools that were the mountain schools, settlement schools, I think they were called, where they sang English folk songs, learnt from Cecil Sharp books. So,
Well, you can trace Gene Ritchie all the way back to England in that
so
respect, can't you?
she probably,
The 6 degrees of Cecil Sharp.
yeah, that's right. Cecil gets in everywhere.
And so I know you love him so much. Is there a Harry Cox
I
version?
don't think there is.
Wow.
Oh
Okay.
no.
It's a shame because Vic Gammon last week referred to Harry Cox's unfortunate loss, I think it was, or young Selkout in his prime, and so we were going 2 for 2. I was hoping we go 3 for 3, but
Yeah,
no Harry Cox Seeds of Love
I
then.
don't think, not that I can think of, although other singers from the vicinity, people who knew Harry Cox, are on record as saying Harry knew everything. He knew every song. So I'm sure he knew it, but he just didn't sing it.
We never collected it from him.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a shame. I was hoping this would be the Harry Cox Appreciation Society
Yeah.
podcast.
Yeah.
I'll turn it into the Gordon Hall Appreciation Society. It'd be good. Population me, I think. Anyway, so yeah, we'll might play some of those tracks in a minute. So I think that just about covers everything everything we can get to in a podcast length of time. I'm sure we could talk for hours about this song, given no time restraints. But for now, we'll leave it there, and we'll see you twice more over the rest of this season for a couple more songs. So for the time being, Steve Roud, thanks very much.
Thanks for having me.
And there we are. That's the historical side of The Seeds of Love. A huge thanks again to Steve Roud. We're now at the halfway point in the episode, so we'll just take a minute or so to listen to a few snippets of different versions of this song, sung by traditional singers. So what you're going to hear now is a snippet of Sprig of Time from Joseph Taylor, Sprig of Time from Gene Hopkins, The Seeds of Love from George Withers, The Seeds of Love from Gordon Hall, and Time 'Tis a Pretty Flower from Lorena Clark.
Once I had a sprig of time, it prospered by night and by day, till a false young man came a-courting to me, and he stole all my time away. Time it is a precious thing, and time it will grow on, and time it will bring all things to an end, and so does our time grow on.
You laugh and you laugh each day. You are now just in your prime. I'll have you taking, keep your garden so gay, and I vow you must lose no time. The
sowed them in the spring. I gathered them up in the morning so clear, while the small birds did sweetly sing. I locked my garden gate, and I vowed I would keep the key, till some young man stole my heart away, when he came a-courting me.
Oh, I sowed the seeds of love, I sowed them in the spring. I planted them up in the morning so soon, whilst the small birds did sweetly sing, whilst the small birds did sweetly sing.
Time 'tis a pretty flower that grows out under the sun, and it's time you and I have come to an end, for it's now our time rolls on. It's very well drinking ale, but it's still better drinking wine, and it's far better sitting on a bunny boy's knee that gains this heart of mine. Time 'tis a pretty flower that grows out under the sun, and it's time you and I have come to an end, for it's now our time rolls on. Oh, she walks in the garden, this lady oh so fine, and she weeds her gardens green, lets no one steal her time.
And you can find the links to those tracks and the albums they're from in the episode notes. On to the second half. I sat down with singer Lizzy Hardingham to get her thoughts on the Seeds of Love. Lizzy Hardingham, welcome to In the Roud.
Thank you for having me. It's lovely to be here.
Oh, I'm so glad you feel that way, because you're recording this before, and if it's gone out live, so at the moment, you're very glad to be here. And of course,
it's an absolute
and
pleasure.
Of course, we're on Zoom, so by being here, you are in your own flat. So
I am indeed.
It's a pleasure for me to be in my house as well,
and it's a pleasure for me to be in mine.
There you go. Excellent. How are you? Are you well?
I'm very well, thank you. The sun is shining. My wildflower seeds are sort of just beginning to bloom, and we feel on the cusp of spring, which feels very apt for this particular song.
How fortuitous! Good stuff. Let's just dive straight in then. Round 3, The Seeds of Love. First of all, though, tell us a bit about yourself and your sort of history with folk music, if there is one, and or how did you come to it? Go.
Yeah, of course. So I was brought up in a really, really musical household, and we started going to folk clubs and folk festivals when I was really very young. I mean, I think we went to not a traditional festival, but sort of the big folk festival. We started going to Crop Ready when I was 6 months old, and we went every year until I was sort of in my mid-20s. So that was really where I heard most of these first folk songs, and where my tiny little brain was blown by traditional music. And for a long, long time, I thought, okay, I really love singing. I really love playing the guitar, playing the piano, the violin. I love this performing lark. It's amazing. But it didn't sort of really come out as folk music or as traditional music, even though around the house, that's exactly what we were singing. We did a lot of 3-part harmony singing. My mum, me and my sister, we sang a lot of sort of Maddie Pryor and her daughter's material. We sang a lot of Chris Weil and Julie Matthews material. So sort of a mixture of traditional and modern folk come singer-songwriter music. But it was almost always female voices. If we were recreating it at home or sort of at family parties, it was almost always female voices, or at the very least female perspectives sung from male voices. Yeah, so it was really invaluable, sort of just having those female voices at home to look up to and to sort of teach me the ropes and learn harmonies from, and all of that sort of wonderful singing that you can do with family that doesn't really compare to anything else. I think that blood harmony bond, the sort of thing that you get with mother and daughter, with siblings, with even cousins, that I haven't really found anything else like that in my life. and that was what I grew up with. So it was just absolutely amazing. And then I went to university to study music, which was amazing fun. I met so many amazing people, that both from popular music, classical music, a whole range of musicians and genres and disciplines, that really influenced me and made me think, oh, actually, this is something I could do. Maybe this is a career. And then after university, that came out as musical theatre, and I thought, okay, that would be great. I'll go and do that. And unfortunately, I got arthritis around that time, so musical theatre suddenly wasn't an option. And I came home to live, which was never in my plan, but I'm so glad I did, because off the back of coming home to live, I went back to Watford Folk Club, which is my local club, and they were so unbelievably welcoming. And they all suggested that I sign up for this new Roots competition, which I hadn't heard of at the time. And I thought, oh, okay, I'll go along, and I'm sure it'll just be local young musicians, young folk musicians, maybe, the home counties, Cambridge, Essex, that sort of thing. And I turned up, and there were these lads from Scotland, there were these people from Cornwall, and I was just amazed at the distance that people had travelled for this competition in St Albans that I thought was a local affair. Turns out it's this national big competition, and I sort of just hadn't realised how amazing it was to be part of it until the day that we all turned up to be finalists. And sort of from that, I have gone on to play folk clubs, festivals, all of those sorts of wonderful places that we all go to see music nowadays. And it's been my absolute privilege since 2018 to sort of romp about the country, singing these songs, singing my own songs, and just have an amazing time with it, and meet amazing people that all have these rich stories about the folk world, and have these amazing stories of their own to tell, to weave into songs. And it's just been the most amazing journey so far, that I'm really looking forward to the rest of it, really.
Right. Yeah. Big shout out to the New Roots competition in St Albans.
Yeah.
Because I performed at it as a finalist back in 2007. I think, was it 8, around about that time, and again in 2013, beg your pardon. And then this year, literally a week and a half ago from the time of this recording, I was asked back to be one of the judges on it. So it's it came full circle in that respect. And it's just the amount of people who have gone through the New Roots doors and come out and are professional musicians and singers, many of whom will turn up on this podcast, I'm sure, over the years. And it's a staggering thing. So yeah, New Roots competition is very, very key to a lot of people's kind of folk journeys, young folk journeys,
Definitely. I think the development it provided, because there were people who went through it at the same year as me that were way accelerated past where I was at the time, and they still got sort of opportunities that corresponded with where they were at their career. So, and you can't, like you said, you can't move for musicians who've been through New Roots and who've had a great time as a result of it.
Absolutely. The one I did back in 2007 was a duo with a friend of mine, and we met. I tried to think of the names of the day and listed in my head about 8 or 9, 10 people, and I still know all of them now, 17 years later. So is that right? My maths is very off. Yeah, about 17 years later. And so it's just, it's fantastic. They're almost all of them are professional musicians and working a lot, and it's amazing. So
yeah, it's a good opportunity.
Big shout out to Alison McFarlane for running the New Roots competition in St Albans. Woo!
Yeah, and so excellently.
Yeah, really brilliant. So, yeah, The Seeds of Love, Roud 3. Do you remember when you first heard this?
I think I do, yeah. Or certainly the first time it stuck out to me as a song where I thought, oh, I like that. I might learn that. I might look that up afterwards. Was 2011. John Bowden included it in his Folk Song a Day project. And the way he sung it was really impactful. And obviously he has a voice that puts a song across amazingly, but also the fact that he knows so much. He's got sort of encyclopedic knowledge of all of these songs. I think just came across in the way he sang it. And it turns out I had heard it lots of times before, sung by various different people, because it's such a well-sung song. I will have heard it at sing-arounds and at clubs and at festivals, and but it sort of hadn't permeated my brain at that point, that it felt like John Bowden singing it in 2011 was the first time I'd ever heard it. And it's probably just it was the first time I'd ever heard it sung like that. And then sort of the sister song, whether it predates this The Seeds of Love, or whether it's a separate song entirely, Let No Man Steal Your Time, that I know you and Steve have talked about. I first heard probably from June Tabor, but the version that sticks in my head as the first version that sort of goaded me on to go and look at the song and find out what it meant and look at previous versions was the Lady Masery version. It was the first time I immediately noticed it, and I thought, well, that's quite similar to The Seeds of Love, isn't it? It's got similar imagery and a similar sort of theme, and it's similar lyrically in terms of not telling a story, not being a ballad, not moving chronologically through a story, rather than it's more of a reflective song of just thinking about, oh, it's a bit rubbish, isn't it?
Yes. And so, yeah, like, because I talked about with Steve, although Steve talked about, because I merely listened and agreed that, the earlier version, that No Man Steal Your Time, is very, it's more matter of factly, whereas Seeds of Love is when you get into the Victorian stuff, it's more poetic, and the flowers
Yeah.
everything, that's clearly a Victorian thing, whereas Sprig of Time, that No Man Steal Your Time is more, well, it's clearly older and less poetic, but still poetic, but not in that kind of flowery, lyrically poetic that Seeds of Love
exactly
is, you know.
It's of its time, and you can tell that from the lyrics. It's frilly, it's floral, and it sort of leans into that very much a lot more than Let No Man Steal Your Time, Bunch of Time, insert whichever title you associate it with.
Yeah. Because I found, doing a bit of research myself as I prep for these episodes, is that the further back the song goes, the more likely it is to have a more matter-of-factly explanatory title. Things like The Unfortunate Lass is probably earlier called Young Sailor Cut Down in His Prime, or Young Girl Cut Down in Their Prime, which is a more explanatory title that would have been the title on like a broadsheet or broadside. So
yeah, does what it says on the tin, explains the story before you even hear any of the first notes.
Yes. And the same I feel is, Let No Man Steal Your Time, and subsequently Seeds of Love.
Yeah. And I think it's quite interesting, certainly the versions that I've heard up to now and up to Singing on the Sing Yonder CD, that it tends to be more female voices are singing Let No Man Steal Your Time. And if there is a male voice on either of these songs, it tends to be the Seeds of Love. And I wonder whether that's something that could be looked into, because Let No Man Steal Your Time is, like you say, more matter of a fact, more it says exactly what the woman wants to say about sort of not falling for the wrong person, not falling into the arms of the wrong man, and not sort of taking for granted that you can forge your own path type thing. That possibly singing that as a man is possibly quite problematic, and sort of a lot more difficult to have that perspective as a man. So definitely the versions that I've sort of mentioned and will mention in the rest of this podcast tend to fall into that category of men singing The Seeds of Love and women singing Let No Man Steal Your Time, Bunch of Time, Sprig of Time, any of those versions of the song.
So your version then, The Seeds of Love, where's that come from, and take us on the journey of where you got it from to where it is now.
Yeah, of course. Let's set off together. So like I said, I think I'd probably heard it in sing-arounds when I was really young, because we used to go to sort of sing-arounds at festivals and in bars and things. So I had certainly heard the song. The melody was recognizable, or certainly the second half of the melody that is often used in other things as well. I had heard before. And so that was definitely in my consciousness, even just writing songs regularly since I was sort of in my early teens. There are elements of that second half of the melody that I can hear in other songs that I have written, or thought I'd written, let's say. So it was definitely in my ear holes as a child and as a young person. But I hadn't really sort of attempted to sing it until that John Bowden version. And I sort of took it up and I took it to a few folk clubs at the time and sort of sang it. And it, because it was relevant at the time and people had heard John Bowden do it, people were very happy to hear it. And it's one of those songs that I think lots and lots of songs go through the arc of having a bunch of people, no pun intended, do it in a similar time frame, and then it sort of doesn't get heard and get sung as much, and then it goes through a popular arc again. And at that time, obviously, you know, Bella Hardy did it. Lots of other people did a version of Let No Man Steal Your Time. So it was sort of zeitgeisty almost. And so I feel like that version certainly is the version that I've heard the most and informs my version the most. But also, my music, the way I write it, tends to come out a lot more on the singer-songwriter side than a traditional folk singer. And most of the arrangements that I make, whether it be traditional or my own music, I either am sitting at a piano or a guitar. Even if it's an unaccompanied version, it will start life with a guitar or a piano, and then that will drop out. So I think my version sounds slightly different than, say, the version that is in the Sing Yonder compilation, or even on the page in the Sing Yonder books, because it's sort of informed by my own influences rather than just the traditional material. But I think that's the beauty of the folk music that we're looking at in this podcast, is that it's malleable and it's art and it's made to be malleable, because that's how it survives. I'm sure the first version collected of Let No Man Steal Your Time or Seeds of Love, well, we know the first version that was collected of Seeds of Love, but it has been done in 100 different ways by 100 different people, and it's a beautiful different song. And I'm very much an advocate of putting your own spin on things, because that's how folk survives and how it gets passed down through the generations, is by it sounding like you singing it. And certainly with John, it sounded like him singing it. And I think that's why it made such an impact on me. And why I was really, really sort of delighted that Carl asked me to sing it on the compilation CD, because it is one of those songs that has been done so much that when you put your own spin on it, it does become a different song to all of these other songs.
So this is the album Sing Yonder 1, isn't it? Which is
yes,
which is the companion to the volume 1 of Carl Sinfield's Sing Yonder book. At the beginning of the podcast a few weeks ago, there's an introduction episode where it's mostly Steve Roud, but there's also an interview with Carl talking about the books and the CD. So you can listen to that if you want, folks, as well, to understand this. But yeah, Carl asked a lot of singers he liked to do versions of the first 10 Roud numbers for the CD, and you're number 3.
I am indeed, and very happy to be so. And it was a delight to be asked amongst so many other really excellent singers, but also so many other traditional singers, because I think most people who have listened to my music, it's not in any way considered traditional. There's certainly traditional influences that I hope people can hear, because they're there for me, but it's certainly not traditional music, despite it being folk music. So it was really a delight, to sort of my imposter syndrome, to be asked to be part of a traditional project.
And the words of your version, then, are they a conglomerate of other versions, or is this pretty much one version that you have used?
So I've used the version that's in the Sing Yonder 1 book, because I was asked to record it for that compilation CD, Sing Yonder 1. I took the words from the book. There might be a few sort of ands or thes that I've omitted or added, but it is, for all intents and purposes, the same as what is on the page there. The melody, however, I already had fairly firmly in my head a melody that I already sing. So it is an amalgamation of lots of different versions and a sort of singer-songwritery inflection, as opposed to exactly what Carl sang in the example in the book. But it's sort of nice to combine those two, one being fairly strict of exactly what's written and one not, to make it something different than every other version that's been before.
Yeah. And so I did listen to the version you provided for that CD. You're playing guitar on that, aren't you? It's a full
I am indeed,
full
yes.
voicing guitar.
Yeah, when he first sent me the first book, I sort of had a flick through and I knew most of the songs already, so I thought, okay, I'll record the third one and I'll pop it on Instagram. And yeah, he saw it and loved it and said, "Oh, would you like to do that on the record?" And I was absolutely over the moon, happy to be sort of involved, and that my version made the cut. So yeah, it was a real joy to record that and sort of have the guitar on it and make it my own.
Great, yeah, and it's a great project. The Sing Yonder book series is great anyway, but the CD as well. Hopefully, it'll become plural. Is a nice way of hearing what you can do with the songs. Where it's a nice sort of cross section of arranging styles for folk
Yeah,
songs.
definitely.
It's not all unaccompanied versions, and it's not all what you might consider the obvious way of accompanying a song. You know, there's all sorts of different ways are presented in that, and that's really terrific.
Definitely, all within the range and genre of folk, but you know that spans so many different styles, and I think he's managed to capture them all on that record. Hopefully, those records in the future.
Exactly. And part of what I'm trying to do on the podcast is a little bit of promoting unaccompanied singing, because as we heard in the mid-episode breaks so far is lots of snippets of recordings of unaccompanied traditional singers. And so we're very, very pleased that you agreed to provide the podcast with an unaccompanied rendition of the Seeds of Love, which we will hear once we've said goodbye.
Absolutely, my pleasure to do so. I love unaccompanied singing. There's a level of vulnerability to it, and you can just do anything with the inflection of your voice to tell a story and to get people to feel something, which is the whole point, really, of music. And especially with songs like this that are asking people to reflect, that are asking people to think about a particular topic, and to think quite, especially for this song, it's quite sort of reflective, it's quite deep. You're asking people to have feelings that are possibly uncomfortable, and doing that without an instrument is just there's a power to it. There's a vulnerability that I absolutely love.
Yes, I agree completely. It's although it's a tough sell for a lot of audiences to have a whole gig of unaccompanied songs, for example.
Yep.
But you know, one day I might give it a go. We'll see. It's I like the idea of turning up without instruments. Great stuff.
It's almost like we're in an unaccompanied folk singing trio, isn't it?
Oh, are we? Yes, we are. Yes. I was gonna mention it later on, but yes. For anyone,
you can edit this out.
Anyone who doesn't know, Lizzy and I are in a little 3-part harmony group, which may or may not get mentioned later on again. So we are doing that, in fact. But I think it's harder. But my point was that it's harder for solo unaccompanied
yeah,
singers. That's
agreed.
When it's literally just there's no safety net. It's just you
and your voice, and that's it.
Yes, and you know nothing to hide behind. And yeah, that's a tough sell. But also, it's a tough sell for audiences sometimes. But it's a tough sell for yourself in terms of how can I sustain that throughout.
Oh yeah, it's grueling to sing sort of
a 2 45-minute set gig.
Yeah, it can be completely grueling to go through 2 45 minutes of just singing with no instrumental breaks, with no sort of respite there. And also, yeah, it's scary not having a guitar or a piano or a mandolin to hide behind.
Yeah.
As the front of the stage, it's completely every single eye is on you. Rather than anything you're doing with your hands or your feet or anything else you might use to play an instrument.
Indeed. I mean, I was at Whitby Folk Week last year, as I am every year, doing emceeing and other duties, and they gave me some solo gig slots that year, and which was very nice of them. And the first one was on the day I arrived, but I had to park the car near the accommodation, and then the office where you collect your tickets was the other end of town, and the gig was halfway between them, but I didn't want to carry the instruments this is a long-winded story, didn't want to carry the instruments all the way to the office, and because of the traffic, I didn't have enough time to go back to the car to get the instruments before going to the gig. So I just turned up at the Rifle Club venue at Whitby and did 35 minutes of unaccompanied singing. And it was quite scary, but I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I loved the freedom it gave me. I could sing any song from my back catalogue in any key I wanted within reason. And I loved the freedom of it, as well as it being scary and no safety nets, all that stuff, you know.
It can be amazingly liberating.
Aside from the handful of people who saw me walk in and said, "Have you not got a melodeon with you?" And so, sorry. So, you know, sorry them. So we'll hear that unaccompanied version from you in a few minutes. Now we come to our recommendations section. I have no recommendations jingle yet, or there won't be one.
Oh, darn.
Recommendations.
Beautiful.
No, not in the slightest. In the historical section of each episode, we get some recommendations of traditional versions, and in the singer segment, we get recommendations of modern or revival performance versions. So, Lizzy Hardingham, what recommendations of other performances or versions of this song have you for us?
Well, at first I thought I'd go for the unaccompanied one that's in my list of 5, that I just think has the most beautiful harmonies, they sing together amazingly, and the blend is cracking. They sound like 4 voices that were supposed to sing together, so I'm very glad that they do, and I'm sure lots of other people are. It is, of course, the Melrose Quartet, the Seeds of Love on their Dominion album. It just feels like the way the song is and should be, and it's gorgeous. Their storytelling is lovely, and their harmonies are just, in all honesty, perfect.
Yes, that is a fantastic version. I wholeheartedly agree.
But if I was going for something completely different, probably the Jim Morrie version on his Sweet England album. Obviously, he does sort of revolutionary things with folk songs and sort of electrifies them and brings them into this century in a sort of unique Jim way. But I really like the soundscape of this particular song, because he's got the sort of melancholy of time moving. There's that constant movement in this version. In the sort of the string sound sort of gothic and floral and lilting and lyrical, but then of course he's got all of the electronic production that makes it move, that spurs it on, that sounds like the unstoppable movement of time, which is so much sewn into this song. And so much of what this song is about sort of time moving without your consent. That I just think he's captured that amazingly in the soundscape he's made from beginning to end. And of course his beautiful sweet voice tells the story on top of all of that it's a cracking version, and I think everybody should listen to it.
Good.
Yeah.
Next.
And of course, it could not go without mention that the Bellowhead version on the Revival album, again, it's how they've made a song that is so much about the movement of time, and it's so lyrical and, like we said, poetic, into a big band form is just beyond my imagination. But it really has a massive sound, this particular version, but because of the chords they've used, completely different to any other version and to anything that's written down. It's melancholy, it's somber, it's sort of quite dark and brooding, really, because they've used mainly minor chords and they modulate quite a lot. They've really played around with it and given it their own spin, which of course Bellowhead are famous for.
Yes, absolutely. It's harmonically quite different to almost any other version I've ever heard, which is very impressive.
Yeah, because there are so many versions. But there are also lots and lots of versions of Let No Man Steal Your Time. As I said earlier, I sort of first heard this sung by female voices, and these recommendations are of no exception. My first one is Zoe Wren. It was on an album called Reckless River a few years ago, and she just has the most beautiful sort of folk / singer-songwriter voice that it's sort of deep and has that resonance in it that I think this story, this song, this reflectiveness lends itself to that deep resonant voice. And yeah, it sort of starts out with a really gentle, ethereal type sound with strings and underpinned by quite a fat double bass. And then it transforms into this fast guitar song that I think really shows that time moves on, sort of regardless of what you do, and if you fall into the wrong man's timeline, then things are not going to end well for you, and that might not be within your control. And it's definitely the version she's done is definitely a sort of cautionary tale version that is almost quite scary, the way that she's produced it and the way that the musicians she's worked with play on it. It's definitely a dark version that I think Let No Man Steal Your Time is probably darker than Seeds of Love. And then the other version of that particular song is Stick in the Wheel, Perspectives on Tradition. And they've done a similar thing to Zoe Wren, although they did it first, where the A part of the melody is sung sort of in grainy, low production, sort of lo-fi harmony as just unaccompanied singing, which sort of is quite grating and is goads you on to go, oh, I want to hear the next bit. What's this going to transform into? Because anybody who's listened to Stick in the Wheel knows that their songs are going to change. They never do the same thing for a whole track. And then it turns into this sort of synth, fast drum, sort of almost sort of antagonistic B part of the melody. And then the two combine, and it's this sort of beautiful dissonance that they've made in this song that, again, works so well for what is being said in the lyrics, that I just think that particular juxtaposition of fast antagonistic instrumentation and flowing lyrics with a sort of quite flowing melody just works so well, that I do think people should go and listen to the Stick in the Wheel version, because it's cracking, quite uncomfortable to listen to, but that's sort of the point, I suppose.
Yes, hope they take that as a compliment.
Definitely. It's meant as one, I promise.
Should put it on their promo. Uncomfortable to listen to. Lizzy Hardingham.
That's the point.
Lizzy Hardingham. That's the quote. Uncomfortable in a nice way.
Yeah. In a pleasant and thought out and extremely intelligent way.
There you go. Yeah, great. They're very, very, very good recommendations there. I would throw into the foray there the mighty Wilson family,
of course,
because they're what they sing called Time is absolutely glorious. I mean, arrangement wise, it's just the four of them, or five sometimes, and they just sing it loudly. But sometimes that's all you want from a song, and they do that so well. The Wilsons, that's on their album, the Wilson Family album, and that's great stuff. I would also recommend Liza Carthy and Norma Waterson sang that on the Gift Band album called Gift. That was Bunch of Time, and Norma really was one of the greatest, if not the greatest singer of traditional songs to ever grace this planet. I mean,
absolutely seminal.
There's nothing she couldn't put her voice to, including non-traditional songs. There's a whole album of her singing one of her solo albums that's just completely non-traditional songs. And she performed one of them on Jules Holland once, and it was just, spellbinding stuff. But her and Liza singing Bunch of Time on the album Gift is sublime, to say the least.
Yeah. And it's that family harmony that we were talking about earlier that is sort of unparalleled to anything else, that just it's synergy.
Yes, quite so. I would also put forth Chris Foster with his version, The Seeds of Love, on the album Hadelin. That's absolutely gorgeous. Just him and guitar, but he's just got such a lovely way about his guitar playing and his gentle singing voice that it just works so beautifully for that song. His name will mention quite a lot over the coming seasons.
I'm sure.
Because there's other songs of his that I can't rate highly enough. I would also, on a kind of folk research level, but also on the performance of the song level, point people towards the album The Search for Five Finger Frank by Alice Jones and Pete Coe.
Ah, yes.
And the version Alice sings on it, The Sprig of Time, because that's a whole album and a show they used to do about the collecting work of Frank Kidson. And so, on a song research level and also a singing level, Sprig of Time by Alice Jones on The Search for Five Finger Frank is really terrific. And I'm going to fly the flag for some slightly lesser known singers with this last one. A duo called Peter and Barbara Snape sing Sprig of Time. And Barbara Snape is one of my current favorite singers. She's just, it's just wonderful. I almost can't express in words how great her singing is. And the version they sing, Sprig of Time, really is something special. So anyway, Peter and Barbara Snape on their album Snape Notes.
Oh, brilliant name.
Brilliant name. I mean, if it's there, use it. Like the title of this podcast. If it's there, just got to use it. So that's my recommendations: Wilson Family, Liza and Norma, Chris Foster, Pico and Alice Jones, and Peter and Barbara Snape.
All excellent versions.
We've come to the end, I think, of our conversation on this subject matter. We'll hear your unaccompanied version in a second. What this episode will go out on May 22nd. So what gigs and stuff have you got coming up?
Well, I've got a few solo gigs. So I'm playing at Conway Hall in London on the 20th of June, which I'm very, very excited for. And then a tour in September where I'm going to places like Sheffield, Newcastle, Leeds, Glastonbury. I can say I've played in Glastonbury, not at Glastonbury. Taunton, London, Hemel, Margate, all of these wonderful places. And I'll be bringing a brand new EP, some traditional, some self-penned music. So lots and lots for people to get their teeth into in September. Have a look on my website for dates for that. But also I'm very excited over the summer that a new vocal harmony singing trio that I'm in with Your Good Self and Seb Stone. We're doing lots of fun festivals this year. So we're doing Sidmouth, Saltburn, Whitby, and we're also doing a gig in St Albans, which is on the 15th of June, I do believe. And yeah, I think that's going to be amazing fun because it'll be the first of our sort of bigger gigs, and we've got so much great material coming for you that it would be lovely to get out and sing to our little heart's contents.
Indeed, can't wait at all. Gonna have to, but I can't. And then after the summer, we've got a handful of gigs in November as well, including the aforementioned Watford Folk Club.
We do indeed. I'm looking forward to that show.
Lovely. On your home gig, your ex-home gig, kind of.
Yeah.
And
likewise your home gig as well at in Lewes.
Oh, the Lewes Saturday Club. That's home gig it was one of my regular folk clubs growing up. I never lived in Lewes, but I'd love to. Wonderful place. So yeah, plenty of Culverake stuff coming up. Watch the skies and the internet for
mostly the internet news.
Though. Mostly the internet, yeah. Watch the skies was a film quote. There won't be too many film quotes in this podcast because only I'll get them. But great. Well, hopefully people can look for those gigs, and we'll put links to your internet doings, social medias, website, etc. in the episode notes. But for this episode of In the Roud, Lizzy Hardingham, thank you very much.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
I sowed the seeds of love. It was all in the spring, in April, May, and June likewise. While small birds they do sing, while small birds they do sing. My garden was planted well, with flowers everywhere, but I hadn't the liberty to choose for myself the flowers that I loved dear, the flowers that I loved dear. My gardener, he stood by, and I asked him to choose for me. He chose me the violet, the lily, and the pink. but those I refused all three, but those I refused all three. In June there's the red rosebud, and that's the flower for me, for often I have plucked at the red rosebud, till I gained the willow tree, till I gained the willow tree. Come, all you false young men, don't leave me to complain, for the grass that has often been trampled underfoot, given time it will rise again, given time it will rise again.
And that's it. We've come to the end of episode 3. What did you think? What are your thoughts on the song, on the Seeds of Love, and or Let No Man Steal Your Time? Do you have any favourite versions, any favourite performances? I'd love to hear from you. Drop us an email at intheroud@singyonder.co.uk or visit us on the various social medias. Just search for In the Roud, a folk song podcast. If you've enjoyed the podcast, I'd very much appreciate it if you would give us a little rating and review on wherever you get your podcasts from. That really helps the podcast to reach a wider audience. One last huge thanks to this week's guests, Steve Roud and Lizzy Hardingham. Join me next week for episode 4. We'll be looking at Roud 4, which is the ballad Lord Thomas and Fair Eleanor. My historical guest will be Steve Roud again, and my singer guest will be Debbie Armour. That's it from me. Stay safe, be well, and I'll see you next time in the Roud.